Welcome to Quiet Corner, where time slows down and the ancient world opens itself to us without hurry. Tonight, we're going to explore something deeply intimate and profoundly human, something we all do every night, yet rarely think about in the context of our distant ancestors. We're going to explore how early humans slept, what their nights were like, the dangers they faced, the dreams they dreamed, and the quiet moments of rest that connected them to us across an unimaginable expanse of time. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Maybe you're listening late at night with the quiet hum of the world around you. Maybe you're already in bed, covers pulled up, preparing to drift off. Either way, let's make this a slow journey, one where you don't need to rush or keep track of the clock, because tonight we're exploring something universal, the need for rest, for safety, for the gentle embrace of sleep that every human who has ever lived has known. Think about it for a moment. Every person who has ever walked this earth, from the first Homo sapiens in Africa to the Neanderthals in Ice Age Europe, from the hunter-gatherers of ancient forests to the farmers of the first villages, every single one of them lay down at night, closed their eyes and slept. They dreamed dreams we'll never know, feared dangers we can only imagine, and found comfort in the warmth of a fire, the presence of loved ones, the security of a cave or shelter. Sleep is one of the most universal human experiences, yet we rarely consider its deep history. How did our ancestors sleep? Where did they rest their heads? What did they fear in the darkness? What comforted them? And what can their sleep habits tell us about our own restless nights? Tonight, we'll explore all of this and more. We'll journey through millions of years of human evolution, from the first hominins who slept in trees to avoid predators, to the Neanderthals who found warmth in caves, to the early Homo sapiens who created the first sleeping platforms, and perhaps the first dreams of something beyond mere survival. We'll explore the science of prehistoric sleep, what archaeologists have discovered about ancient sleeping arrangements, how fire transformed the night, and how the rhythms of sleep changed as humans migrated out of Africa into colder climates with longer nights. We'll consider the dangers that lurked in the darkness, the predators that hunted at night, and the strategies our ancestors developed to stay safe. We'll also explore something more intimate, the moments of connection that happened around the fire at night, the stories told, the knowledge passed down, the bonds strengthened. Nighttime was not just about sleep, it was about community, about sharing, about being human together in the darkness. And finally, we'll consider what prehistoric sleep can teach us about our own sleep today. In our world of electric lights, screens, and constant stimulation, we've lost something that our ancestors had, a natural rhythm tied to the sun and the seasons, a deep connection to the cycle of day and night that shaped human evolution for millions of years. So settle in now, get comfortable, and let your mind drift back through time, back to the nights when our ancestors huddled around fires, back to the caves where they found shelter, back to the moments when they closed their eyes and dreamed dreams we'll never know, but feelings we share with them still. This is the story of how early humans slept, and in telling it, perhaps we'll find our own way to rest a little easier tonight. Let's begin at the very beginning with the first hominins, our distant ancestors who lived millions of years ago in the forests of Africa. These were not yet humans as we know them, but creatures on the long path that would eventually lead to us. They were small, with brains not much larger than a chimpanzee's, but they had already begun to walk upright, freeing their hands for other tasks. For these early hominins, night was a time of profound danger. The darkness brought predators, big cats with night vision, hyenas that hunted in packs, giant snakes that could constrict and kill. Sleeping on the ground was simply not an option. So our earliest ancestors did what their primate relatives still do today. They slept in trees. Imagine climbing into the branches as the sun began to set, finding a sturdy limb that could support your weight, perhaps constructing a simple platform of leaves and branches to make a more comfortable sleeping surface. This was not the soft mattress we know today, but it was safety, elevation above the ground where predators could not easily reach. These tree nests, or sleeping platforms, were likely built fresh each night. There's evidence that chimpanzees and other great apes do this today, carefully selecting a tree, bending branches together to form a platform, and then sleeping there for a single night before moving on. Our early ancestors probably did the same. This nightly ritual of nest building was not just about safety, it was also about comfort. By creating a platform, they could sleep more soundly, without fear of falling from the tree. They could curl up in a position that conserved body heat and allowed for deeper rest. And they could do it all in the company of their group, with others nearby in neighboring trees, a community of sleepers suspended above the dangerous ground. The transition from sleeping in trees to sleeping on the ground was one of the most significant changes in human evolution. It didn't happen overnight, of course, but gradually, as our ancestors became more confident in their ability to defend themselves, as they developed tools and fire, as they found caves and rock shelters that offered natural protection. This transition likely began with the Australopithecines, the group that includes the famous Lucy. These hominins still spent time in trees. Their long arms and curved fingers suggest they were adept climbers. But they also walked upright on the ground, and they may have begun to explore sleeping in caves or under rock overhangs. Imagine a group of Australopithecines as dusk approaches. They've been foraging all day, gathering fruits and seeds, perhaps scavenging meat from carcasses. As the light fades, they make their way to a familiar rock shelter, a place they've used before. There's no fire yet. That invention is still millions of years in the future. But the shelter offers protection from wind and rain, and its high walls make it harder for predators to approach unnoticed. They settle in for the night, huddled together for warmth and comfort. The young ones sleep close to their mothers. The adults take turns staying alert, watching for danger. It's not yet the secure sleep we know, but it's a step toward it, a move from the trees to the ground, from isolation to community, from constant vigilance to shared responsibility. This is the beginning of something profoundly human, the nighttime gathering, the communal rest, the shared watch against danger. It's the origin of the campfire, even before fire itself, the circle of bodies providing warmth and protection, the group becoming a single organism that could rest while some remained awake. Now let's move forward in time to the emergence of our own genus, Homo. Around 2.5 million years ago, the first members of our genus appeared in Africa. They had larger brains than their Australopithecine ancestors, and they had something new, stone tools. These simple flakes and choppers allowed them to access new food sources, to butcher animals, to crack open bones for marrow. With better nutrition came bigger brains, and with bigger brains came new possibilities. One of those possibilities was the control of fire. The exact timing of when humans first mastered fire is still debated, but evidence from sites in Africa suggests it may have been as early as 1.5 million years ago. Fire transformed the night like nothing before or since. For the first time, our ancestors could push back against the darkness, could create a circle of light and warmth that kept predators at bay. Fire meant safety, and safety meant deeper, more restful sleep. Imagine a camp of Homo erectus around 1 million years ago. They've built a fire at the center of their sleeping area, perhaps in front of a cave or in a sheltered spot. The flames crackle and pop, sending sparks up into the night sky. The light dances on the faces of those gathered around, casting long shadows on the rock walls behind them. Around this fire, something new is happening. People are talking, not just with grunts and gestures, but with language, with words that can convey complex ideas, that can tell stories, that can pass knowledge from one generation to the next. The night becomes a time for teaching, for sharing, for building the culture that would come to define humanity. The fire provides more than just light and warmth. It also allows our ancestors to cook food, and cooked food is easier to digest, providing more energy for that expensive organ, the brain. Perhaps they roasted meat on sticks over the flames, sharing the meal before settling down to sleep. Perhaps they used the fire to harden wooden spears, to make better tools for the next day's hunt. Around the fire, they also developed new social bonds. The night became a time of intimacy, of closeness, of shared experience. Children learned from their elders, stories were told and retold, knowledge was preserved and passed on. The fire was the center of the community, the heart of the group, the place where humanity became truly human. And when it was time to sleep, They would curl up around the dying embers, close enough to feel the residual warmth, far enough to avoid the smoke. They slept in family groups, parents with children, siblings together, the elderly in the most sheltered spots. They slept close, sharing body heat, sharing comfort, sharing the security of the group. This pattern of sleep, gathered around a fire in a sheltered spot with others nearby, persisted for hundreds of thousands of years. It was the sleep of our ancestors through the long ages of human evolution, through the ice ages, through the migrations out of Africa, through the encounters with Neanderthals and Denisovans, through all the changes that would eventually lead to modern humans. Now let's travel to a specific time and place, to the Neanderthals of Ice Age Europe. These were our closest relatives, a distinct human species that evolved in Europe and Western Asia, adapted to cold climates, with stocky bodies and large brains. They lived through some of the harshest conditions any human has ever faced, and they too had to sleep. Neanderthals are often portrayed as brutish and simple, but the evidence tells a different story. They controlled fire, they made sophisticated tools, they cared for their sick and injured, and they almost certainly had language. They also had to survive nights that could be bitterly cold, with temperatures far below freezing. Imagine a Neanderthal family group as winter approaches. They've found a cave, a deep shelter that will protect them from the wind and snow. They've built a fire near the entrance where smoke can escape but warmth can be retained. They've gathered furs and hides, piles of soft insulation that will make their sleeping area comfortable. As night falls, they settle in. The fire glows warmly, casting light on the cave walls. They've eaten well, perhaps from a successful hunt, and now they rest. Children play for a while, chasing each other around the fire before being called to settle down. Adults talk quietly, sharing observations, planning for the next day. When sleep finally comes, they curl up in the furs, alone or in pairs, parents with young children, elders near the fire for extra warmth. They sleep deeply, secure in the knowledge that the fire will deter predators, that the cave walls protect them from the elements, that the group will alert each other if danger approaches. This was Neanderthal sleep, warm, communal, secure. And when they dreamed, what did they see? Perhaps they dreamed of hunts, of the great beasts they pursued across the frozen plains. Perhaps they dreamed of their loved ones, of children now grown, of mates now gone. Perhaps they dreamed of something beyond our knowing, something lost with their species when they vanished around 40,000 years ago. Now let's turn to our own species, Homo sapiens. We evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago, and for most of our history, we lived much like other humans, hunting and gathering, living in small groups, sleeping under the stars or in caves and shelters. But around 100,000 years ago, something began to change. The archaeological record shows the first hints of symbolic behavior, of art and personal adornment, of things that suggest a new kind of mind, a mind capable of imagination, of abstraction, of conceiving of things beyond the immediate present. This new capacity would eventually transform human sleep, not the physical act of sleeping, but the mental space that sleep occupies. For the first time, humans could imagine the future, could plan for days ahead, could worry about things not immediately present. And they could also dream in new ways, could create stories and myths, could populate their nights with gods and monsters, with heroes and ancestors. Imagine a camp of early Homo sapiens in Africa, perhaps 75,000 years ago. They've built their shelters near a water source, simple structures of branches and hides that can be easily moved. As night falls, they gather around the fire, and someone begins to tell a story. It's a story about the creation of the world, about the first people, about the animals and spirits that inhabit the landscape. The firelight dances on the storyteller's face, and the listeners are rapt, transporting to another world, another time. This is not just entertainment, it's education, it's religion, it's the foundation of culture. When they finally sleep, the stories continue in their dreams. They dream of the spirits the storyteller described, of the ancestors, of the animals they hunt. Their dreams are rich with meaning, with symbolism, with the stuff of myth. Sleep becomes not just rest, but a bridge to another world, a world of imagination and spirit. This is something new in human evolution, the dream as a meaningful experience, as something to be interpreted, shared, acted upon. We see evidence of this in the art of early humans, in the cave paintings of Europe, in the carvings of animals and human figures, in the burial practices that suggest beliefs about an afterlife. Sleep had become more than just physical rest. It had become a spiritual experience, a time when the soul could travel, when ancestors could speak, when the future could be glimpsed. This belief in the power of dreams persists in many cultures to this day, a legacy of our deep past. Now let's consider the practical aspects of prehistoric sleep. How did our ancestors arrange their sleeping spaces? What did they sleep on? How did they stay warm? How did they deal with the challenges of different climates and environments? The evidence comes from archaeological sites around the world, from the caves of Europe to the open-air camps of Africa, from the frozen north to the tropical forests. In each place, humans adapted their sleep to the local conditions, finding creative solutions to the universal need for rest. In cold climates, insulation was crucial. At sites like the Cave of Kebara in Israel, archaeologists have found evidence of bedding made from plant materials, layers of grasses and leaves that would have provided a soft, insulating surface. These beds were sometimes burned, perhaps to get rid of pests, before being replaced with fresh material. At other sites, like the famous Neanderthal site of Shanidar in Iraq, pollen from flowers was found associated with burials, suggesting that Neanderthals may have used aromatic plants in their sleeping areas, perhaps for comfort or for ritual purposes. The idea of a pleasant-smelling bed is not a modern invention. In warmer climates, sleep might have been simpler, a woven mat of reeds or leaves, a depression in the sand, a hide spread on the ground. At sites in Africa, archaeologists have found concentrations of artifacts that suggest specific sleeping areas, distinct from areas used for tool-making or food preparation. At the site of Ohalo II in Israel, dating to about 23,000 years ago, archaeologists found the remains of a brush hut with a clear sleeping area. The hut was small, only about 3 meters across, and inside they found a depression filled with grass, a deliberate sleeping platform. The person who slept there had gathered soft plants to make their rest more comfortable, just as we might fluff our pillows today. This attention to comfort, to creating a soft, warm place to sleep, is deeply human. It speaks to our need not just for rest, but for comfort, for a space that feels safe and pleasant. Even in the harsh conditions of the Ice Age, our ancestors took time to make their beds comfortable. But comfort was not the only consideration. Safety was paramount. In open camps, sleepers needed to be protected from predators, from the elements, from hostile neighbors. This is why we see evidence of defensive structures, of camps arranged in circles, of shelters with narrow entrances that could be easily blocked. At some sites, archaeologists have found evidence of windbreaks, simple walls of branches or rocks that would have protected sleepers from the wind. At others, they found post holes arranged in circles, suggesting tents or huts that could be covered with hides. These structures would have provided not just shelter from the weather, but also a sense of enclosure, of security, of home. The word home is important here. For the first time in human evolution, our ancestors were creating places that were specifically for sleeping, places they returned to night after night. These were not just random spots under a tree, but deliberately chosen and prepared locations, places invested with meaning and memory. Think about what this means. A child growing up in such a camp would know that this was where they slept, where their parents slept, where their grandparents had slept. The sleeping place became part of their identity, part of their sense of belonging. It was the beginning of home as we know it. Now let's consider the role of fire in prehistoric sleep. We've already touched on this, but it deserves deeper exploration. Fire was not just a source of warmth and light, it was a transformative technology that changed the very nature of night. Before fire, night was a time of fear, of vulnerability, of forced inactivity. After fire, night became a time of community, of storytelling, of social bonding. The fire extended the day, allowing humans to be active after sunset, to share experiences, to strengthen the ties that held groups together. The fire also changed sleep itself. With a fire burning, people could sleep more deeply, secure in the knowledge that predators would be deterred by the flames and by the smoke, which masks human scent. The fire also provided warmth, allowing people to sleep in colder conditions than would otherwise be possible. But fire also required maintenance. Someone had to keep it burning through the night, adding wood, stirring the embers, ensuring it didn't go out. This was likely a shared responsibility, with different people taking turns as fire watchers while others slept. Imagine being the one on fire duty in the middle of the night. The others are asleep around you, curled up in their furs, breathing softly. The fire crackles and pops, sending sparks up into the darkness. Beyond the circle of light, the world is black, full of unknown dangers. You add another log, stir the embers, and settle in for your watch. This is a moment of solitude, of quiet contemplation, of being alone with your thoughts while others sleep. What did our ancestors think about during these night watches? Did they gaze at the stars and wonder about their meaning? Did they think about the day ahead, the hunt, the foraging, the tasks that awaited? Did they think about their loved ones, about the children sleeping nearby, about the mates who would wake beside them? These night watches were also times of learning, of passing down knowledge from elders to younger members of the group. Imagine an elder teaching a young person how to tend the fire, how to read the stars, how to recognize the sounds of the night. The darkness becomes a classroom, the firelight a lamp, the night a time of education. Now let's consider something more intimate, the physical experience of prehistoric sleep. How did our ancestors position themselves? What did they wear? How did they deal with the challenges of different seasons? In cold climates, sleepers likely wore clothing to bed, the same furs and hides they wore during the day. They would have layered these garments, tucking in edges to prevent heat loss. They would have slept close together, sharing body heat, parents with children, mates intertwined. In warmer climates, sleep might have been simpler, perhaps naked or nearly so, with a light covering for comfort or protection from insects. At sites in Africa, archaeologists have found evidence of insect-repellent plants being used in sleeping areas, suggesting that our ancestors dealt with the same pests that bother us today. Sleeping positions would have varied depending on the surface, the temperature, the presence of others. Side sleeping is common among primates and was likely common among our ancestors. Curling up conserves heat and protects vital organs. Stretching out might have been reserved for warmer nights or for those sleeping alone. We can imagine a family group on a cold night, all curled together like a litter of puppies, the smallest and youngest in the center where it's warmest. The adults on the outside provide a barrier against the cold, their bodies absorbing the worst of it. This is not just efficient, it's loving, a physical expression of care and protection. Now let's consider the dreams of our ancestors. This is perhaps the most mysterious aspect of prehistoric sleep, the one we can never truly know. But we can make some educated guesses based on what we know of human psychology and on the dreams of modern hunter-gatherers. Dreams likely served many of the same functions they do today, processing emotions, consolidating memories, working through problems. But they also likely had additional significance in cultures that believed in the spiritual power of dreams. For many traditional peoples, dreams are not just random neural firings, but messages from the spirit world, visits from ancestors, glimpses of the future. Dreams are taken seriously, discussed in the morning, interpreted by elders, acted upon. A powerful dream might change the course of a person's life, might determine where they hunt, who they marry, what they believe. We see echoes of this in the cave art of prehistoric Europe. Some of the paintings are in deep, hard-to-reach chambers, places that would have required crawling through narrow passages, perhaps in a trance-like state. Some researchers have suggested that these caves were used for dream rituals, for seeking visions, for connecting with the spirit world. Imagine a shaman or spiritual leader descending into the depths of a cave, carrying a small lamp, seeking a vision. In the darkness, in the silence, they might fall into a trance, might dream with open eyes, might see the animals that would later be painted on the walls. The cave becomes a dream space, a place where the boundary between waking and sleeping dissolves. This connection between sleep, dreams, and spirituality is deeply ancient. It may go back to the earliest humans, perhaps even to the Neanderthals. When we dream, we connect with something that our ancestors also experienced, a shared human heritage that transcends time and culture. Now let's consider the rhythm of prehistoric sleep. How many hours did our ancestors sleep? Did they sleep in one long block or in segments? How did the seasons affect their sleep? These questions have fascinated sleep researchers who have studied modern hunter-gatherer groups to gain insights into prehistoric sleep patterns. What they've found is surprising and instructive. Studies of groups like the Kung San of southern Africa and the Hadza of Tanzania show that hunter-gatherers sleep an average of about 6.5 to 7 hours per night, slightly less than the average modern Westerner. They don't nap during the day, and they generally stay awake through the daylight hours, sleeping after dark. But their sleep is not exactly like ours. They go to sleep shortly after sunset, typically within a few hours, and they wake before sunrise. Their sleep is strongly tied to the natural light-dark cycle, without the interference of electric lighting that so disrupts modern sleep. They also experience less insomnia than modern populations. This may be because they don't have the chronic stress of modern life, or because their physical activity during the day promotes deeper sleep, or because their sleep environment is more natural. Whatever the reason, it suggests that our ancestors slept relatively well despite the dangers and hardships of their lives. But there's another pattern that's emerged from these studies, one that may reflect a more ancient sleep rhythm. Some researchers have proposed that before the Industrial Revolution, humans slept in two segments, a first sleep and a second sleep, with a period of wakefulness in between. Historical records from pre-industrial Europe describe a first sleep that began shortly after sunset, followed by a period of wakefulness an hour or two after midnight, during which people would pray, talk, make love, or simply reflect, followed by a second sleep until dawn. This biphasic sleep pattern may have been the norm for much of human history, and perhaps for prehistory as well. Imagine our ancestors sleeping for a few hours after dark, then waking in the middle of the night. The fire has burned low, the embers still glow. Around them, others begin to stir. There's quiet conversation. Perhaps someone adds wood to the fire. Perhaps a mother nurses a child. Then, after an hour or so, they settle back to sleep until dawn. This middle-of-the-night wakefulness would have been a time of intimacy, of quiet connection, of shared experience. It's a pattern we've largely lost in the modern world, where we sleep in one solid block and panic if we wake in the night. But our ancestors would have seen such waking as normal, even welcome. Now let's consider how sleep changed as humans migrated out of Africa into new environments. The first major migration, by Homo erectus around 1.8 million years ago, took humans into Asia, into the Middle East, into regions with different climates, different day lengths, different challenges. Sleeping in these new environments required adaptation. In colder regions, better insulation was needed, warmer shelters, more effective use of fire. In regions with longer winter nights, the sleep period would have been extended, with more time spent in shelters, more time for storytelling, for tool making, for socializing. In regions with shorter summer nights, sleep might have been compressed, with less time for rest and more time for the activities that could only be done in daylight. This seasonal variation in sleep duration would have been a fact of life for our ancestors, just as it is for people living at high latitudes today. The migration into Europe, into the territories of the Neanderthals, would have been particularly challenging. Ice Age Europe was cold, with long, dark winters and short, bright summers. Sleeping through a winter night that lasted 16 hours or more would have required substantial preparation, stockpiled fuel, warm shelters, and the social structures to cope with extended periods of confinement. Imagine a group of early Homo sapiens arriving in Europe around 45,000 years ago. They've never experienced such cold, such long nights. They learn from the Neanderthals, perhaps, how to build better shelters, how to make warmer clothing, how to survive the darkness. They adapt, as humans always do, and they make this harsh land their home. Now let's consider something more personal, the experience of a prehistoric child going to sleep. This is perhaps the most relatable aspect of ancient sleep, the universal experience of being tucked in, of feeling safe, of drifting off with the knowledge that parents are near. A prehistoric child, let's call her Isla, lives with her family in a small group of hunter-gatherers. As dusk approaches, she helps gather firewood, brings it to the central hearth. Her mother prepares the sleeping area, spreading fresh grasses and arranging furs. Her father checks the perimeter, ensuring the fire is bright enough to deter predators. As darkness falls, the family gathers around the fire. They share food, roasted meat, and gathered roots. An elder tells a story, a tale of the ancestors, of the spirits that watch over them. Isla listens, half understanding, half dreaming, her eyes growing heavy. Her mother notices and beckons her to the sleeping area. Isla curls up in the furs, warm and soft. Her mother covers her with another hide, tucks it around her shoulders. She murmurs something, a blessing, a good night, a word of love. Isla closes her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fire, the quiet voices of the adults, the distant sounds of the night. She feels safe. She knows that her parents are nearby, that the fire protects them, that the group watches over each other. She drifts into sleep, into dreams we'll never know, but feelings we share with her still, the comfort of being loved, the security of home, the peace of rest. This scene could have played out 100,000 years ago, or 50,000, or 10,000. It could be playing out tonight, in some remote corner of the world where people still live as our ancestors did. The details change, the furs become blankets, the cave becomes a house, the fire becomes electric light, but the essence remains, the child sleeping, safe and loved. Now let's consider the role of sleep in human evolution. Sleep is not just a passive state, it's an active process that shapes our brains, our bodies, our very humanity. During sleep, we consolidate memories, process emotions, repair tissues, strengthen immune systems. Without adequate sleep, we cannot function, cannot learn, cannot thrive. For our ancestors, good sleep would have been essential for survival. The hunter who slept poorly would be less alert the next day, less able to track prey, less able to avoid predators. The mother who slept poorly would be less attentive to her child, less able to provide care. The elder who slept poorly would be less able to share knowledge, to guide the group. Natural selection would have favored those who could sleep well despite the challenges of their environment, who could find or create safe sleeping spaces, who could maintain sleep through the night, who could wake refreshed and ready for the day's challenges. Our ability to sleep, and to sleep well, is itself a product of evolution. But sleep also shaped our evolution in more subtle ways. The time spent sleeping was time not spent on other activities, foraging, hunting, socializing, reproducing. There must have been powerful benefits to sleep to outweigh these costs. Those benefits include brain function, immune function, emotional regulation, all essential for human success. The evolution of the human brain, with its enormous energy demands, may have been closely tied to the evolution of sleep. During sleep, the brain clears waste products, consolidates learning, processes emotions. A bigger brain needs more sleep, or at least more effective sleep, to function properly. This may be why humans sleep less than some other primates, but our sleep is deeper, more efficient. The invention of fire, of shelters, of sleeping platforms, all allowed for more effective sleep. By creating safer, more comfortable sleeping environments, our ancestors could sleep more deeply, could spend more time in the restorative stages of sleep, could wake better prepared for the day's challenges. These innovations were not just about comfort, they were about survival, about giving our species an edge in the competitive struggle for existence. Now let's travel to a specific time and place, to the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dating to about 25,000 years ago. This was a camp of early modern humans, hunter-gatherers living during the last ice age. Archaeologists have found evidence of their dwellings, their tools, their art, and even their sleeping arrangements. The dwellings at Dolní Věstonice were made of mammoth bones, dozens of them, arranged to form a framework that would have been covered with hides. These were substantial structures, large enough to house multiple families. Inside, they would have been warm, protected from the bitter cold outside. In one dwelling, archaeologists found a central hearth, surrounded by areas that would have been used for different activities, tool making, food preparation, and sleeping. The sleeping area was slightly raised, perhaps to provide better insulation from the cold ground. It was covered with organic material that has long since decayed, but we can imagine it as a soft, warm platform of furs and plant matter. Imagine a winter night at Dolny Vestonis. Outside, the wind howls across the frozen plain. Snow drifts against the walls of the dwelling, but inside, it's warm. The fire glows, casting light on the bone walls on the faces of those gathered. Children sleep in the sleeping area, curled together under piles of furs. Adults sit by the fire, talking quietly, perhaps working on tools, perhaps simply enjoying the warmth and companionship. As the night deepens, they too will sleep, settling into the furs beside their children, their mates, their friends. They will sleep through the long winter night, 10 hours, 12 hours, maybe more. They will dream of hunts, of the mammoths that provided the bones for their home, of the spirits that watch over them. And they will wake to another day in the Ice Age, another day of survival, of community, of being human. Now let's consider the role of children in prehistoric sleep. Children are not just small adults. They have different sleep needs, different vulnerabilities, different experiences of night. For a prehistoric child, night could be a time of fear, of the unknown, of monsters that might lurk in the darkness. But it could also be a time of comfort, of closeness, of the security of parents' arms. We know from studies of modern hunter-gatherers that children typically sleep with their parents, often until they are several years old. This co-sleeping provides warmth, security, and easy access to breastfeeding for infants. It also strengthens the bond between parent and child, a bond that would be essential for survival in a world where childhood was long and vulnerable. Imagine a prehistoric mother nursing her infant in the middle of the night. The fire has burned low, but she can see by its glow. The baby stirs, roots for the breast, begins to nurse. The mother drifts, half asleep, half awake, in that state that nursing mothers know so well. Around her, the others sleep on, undisturbed. This moment, repeated millions of times over millions of years, is part of what made us human. As children grow older, they might sleep with siblings, with other children of the group, forming their own sleeping clusters. But they would still be near their parents, still within calling distance, still protected by the group. The sleeping area would be a place of safety, of warmth, of connection. Now let's consider the dangers that lurked in the prehistoric night. Despite all their precautions, despite fire and shelters and group vigilance, our ancestors faced real threats while they slept. Predators like lions, leopards, hyenas, and bears would have been attracted to camps by the scent of food, by the presence of vulnerable humans. A lapse in vigilance could be fatal. We see evidence of this in the fossil record. Some hominin bones show bite marks from predators, evidence that our ancestors were sometimes prey. At the site of Swartkrans in South Africa, for example, many Australopithecine bones were found in deposits that also contain leopard remains, suggesting that leopards may have preyed on early hominins, perhaps dragging them into trees to eat. This danger would have shaped sleep in profound ways. The need for vigilance, for someone to stay awake while others slept, for shelters that could be defended, for fire that would deter predators. The fear of the night, of what might be lurking in the darkness, would have been a constant presence in our ancestors' lives. But fear was not the only emotion associated with night. There was also wonder. The night sky, free of light pollution, would have been spectacular, a vast canopy of stars, the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon, meteors flashing, planets moving through the fixed stars. Our ancestors would have gazed at this sky with awe and curiosity, would have told stories about it, would have used it to navigate, to mark the seasons, to predict the future. Imagine lying on your back outside the shelter, looking up at the stars. The fire crackles nearby. Others are asleep, but you're on watch, or perhaps you simply can't sleep. The stars are so bright they cast faint shadows. The Milky Way is a river of light. You pick out patterns, shapes that remind you of animals, of people, of the stories you've heard since childhood. This experience of lying under the stars, of feeling small beneath their vastness, of wondering about their meaning, is one of the most universal human experiences. It connects us to our ancestors across the millennia, to the first humans who looked up and wondered, to the Neanderthals who perhaps also gazed at the same sky, to all who have ever slept under the stars. Now let's consider how sleep changed with the development of agriculture around 12,000 years ago. This was one of the most profound transformations in human history, and it affected every aspect of life, including sleep. With agriculture came permanent settlements, villages of mud brick or stone, houses with rooms, with roofs, with doors that could be closed and locked. Sleep became more private, more enclosed, more separated from the community. Families slept in their own houses, in their own rooms, on beds that were raised off the ground. This new way of sleeping had advantages and disadvantages. On the one hand, it was more private, more comfortable, more secure. On the other hand, it was more isolated, less communal, less connected to the group. The shared sleeping of the hunter-gatherer camp, with everyone together around the fire, gave way to the separate sleeping of the agricultural village. Agriculture also changed the rhythm of sleep. Farmers had to rise early to tend their fields, to water crops, to chase away pests. The sleep schedule became more rigid, more tied to the demands of cultivation. And with the development of artificial light, first from oil lamps, later from candles, the night could be extended, used for work or for socializing. But for most of human history, even after the development of agriculture, sleep remained closely tied to the natural light-dark cycle. People went to bed shortly after sunset and rose shortly before sunrise, with variations by season and by latitude. The night was still dark, still quiet, still a time of rest. Now let's consider the archaeology of sleep. How do we know how our ancestors slept? What evidence do archaeologists use to reconstruct prehistoric sleeping arrangements? The evidence is often indirect, but it can be surprisingly detailed. At some sites, archaeologists have found distinct sleeping areas, separated from areas used for other activities. These areas often contain concentrations of artifacts that suggest they were used for rest, soft materials that have decayed, but whose impressions can sometimes be seen in the soil. At the site of Clayses River in South Africa, dating to about 100,000 years ago, archaeologists found evidence of bedding made from grasses and other plant materials. The bedding had been burned, perhaps to get rid of pests, and then replaced. This cycle of use and replacement suggests that these were regular sleeping areas, used repeatedly over time. At the site of Es Eskal in Israel, dating to about 120,000 years ago, archaeologists found the burial of a child with a shell placed near its head. This has been interpreted as evidence of belief in an afterlife, but it also tells us something about sleep, about the care taken with the dead, about the continuity between sleep and death in the human imagination. At the site of Pinsevent in France, dating to about 12,000 years ago, archaeologists found the remains of a hunter-gatherer camp with clear sleeping areas. These were arranged around hearths, with the sleeping areas on one side and activity areas on the other. The sleeping areas were covered with moss and other soft materials, and they were large enough for several people, suggesting family sleeping. At the site of Abu Huraira in Syria, one of the first agricultural villages, dating to about 11,000 years ago, archaeologists found houses with distinct sleeping platforms, raised areas of packed mud that would have been covered with mats or hides. These platforms are the direct ancestors of our beds, the first dedicated sleeping furniture. Each of these discoveries gives us a window into the sleep of our ancestors, a glimpse of how they arranged their rest, what they valued in a sleeping place, how they balanced comfort and safety. It's a fragmentary record, but it's enough to see that sleep has always been important, always been cared for, always been a central part of human life. Now let's consider the psychology of prehistoric sleep. What did our ancestors think about as they drifted off? What anxieties troubled them? What comforts soothed them? We can never know for certain, but we can make some educated guesses based on what we know of human psychology and on the experiences of modern hunter-gatherers. Anxiety about predators would have been real, especially in camps without fire or with poorly maintained fires. The slightest sound, a twig snapping, a rustle in the undergrowth, could signal danger. Anxiety about the next day's food would also have been present. Would the hunt be successful? Would the gathering grounds yield enough? Would there be enough to feed the children, the elders, the group? These worries would have accompanied many into sleep, just as worries about work, about money, about relationships accompany us today. But there would also have been comfort. The presence of loved ones, the warmth of the fire, the security of the group. In a world full of dangers, the camp was a haven, a place where you could let down your guard, where others watched while you slept, where you were surrounded by people who cared about you. The bonds formed in these nightly gatherings would have been powerful. Sleeping together, literally, creates intimacy, trust, connection. The oxytocin released during physical closeness would have strengthened pair bonds, parent-child bonds, group bonds. Sleep was not just rest, it was relationship. Now let's consider the evolution of the bedroom. The idea of a separate room dedicated to sleep is relatively recent in human history, dating only to the last few thousand years. For most of human existence, sleep was a communal activity, shared with family, with the group, with anyone who happened to be in the camp. The development of the bedroom was tied to the development of permanent dwellings, of houses with multiple rooms, of privacy as a valued concept. In agricultural villages, we see the first evidence of separate sleeping areas, rooms set aside for rest, sometimes with raised platforms or built-in beds. In ancient Egypt, the wealthy had bedrooms with beds raised off the floor, with headrests instead of pillows, with linens and mosquito nets. In ancient Greece and Rome, bedrooms were common in well-to-do houses, often small, often windowless, but dedicated to sleep. In medieval Europe, sleeping arrangements varied widely. The poor slept on pallets on the floor, often in the same room where they cooked and ate. The wealthy had bedchambers, sometimes with massive four-poster beds draped with curtains for warmth and privacy. Multiple people often shared these beds, even strangers in inns. The idea of sleeping alone, in your own bed, in your own room, is very recent, dating only to the last century or two in Western societies, and still not universal globally. For most of human history, for most humans today, sleep is shared. Now let's consider what we've lost and what we've gained in the evolution of sleep. We've gained privacy, comfort, safety from predators, protection from the elements. We've gained the ability to control our sleep environment, to make it dark, to make it quiet, to make it just the way we like it. But we've also lost something. We've lost the communal aspect of sleep, the sense of being part of a group even in our most vulnerable state. We've lost the intimacy of sleeping with others, the warmth, the connection, the shared experience. We've lost the natural rhythm of sleep, tied to the sun and the seasons, in favor of artificial light and rigid schedules. We've also gained new sleep problems. Insomnia, sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome all seem to be more common in modern societies than in traditional ones. Whether this is because we notice them more, because they're actually more common, or because our sleep is more fragile is not clear, but the contrast is striking. Studies of hunter-gatherers show that they sleep less than we do on average, but they report fewer sleep problems. They go to sleep when it gets dark, they wake when it gets light, and they sleep soundly through the night. They don't have trouble falling asleep, they don't wake repeatedly, they don't lie awake worrying. This suggests that our modern sleep problems may be, at least in part, a product of our modern lifestyle. The constant stimulation, the artificial light, the stress, the disconnection from natural rhythms all may contribute to making sleep more difficult than it should be. Now let's consider what we can learn from prehistoric sleep. How can understanding how our ancestors slept help us sleep better today? One lesson is the importance of darkness. Our ancestors slept in near-total darkness, with only the faint glow of stars or the dying embers of a fire. This darkness signaled to their bodies that it was time to sleep, triggering the release of melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep. Today, we're surrounded by light, from streetlights, from screens, from devices that glow even when we're not looking at them. This light suppresses melatonin, making it harder to fall asleep and to stay asleep. Creating a dark sleeping environment, free from artificial light, can help restore this natural signal. Another lesson is the importance of temperature. Our ancestors slept in environments that cooled down at night, that were often quite cold, especially in winter. This drop in temperature signals to the body that it's time to sleep, and a cool sleeping environment is associated with deeper, more restorative sleep. Today, we often sleep in overheated rooms with heavy blankets with the thermostat set to tropical temperatures. Cooling down the bedroom using lighter bedding, allowing the body to cool naturally during the night, can improve sleep quality. Another lesson is the importance of routine. Our ancestors went to sleep at roughly the same time each night, shortly after sunset, and woke at roughly the same time each morning, shortly before sunrise. This regularity reinforced their circadian rhythms, making sleep more predictable and more restorative. Today, our schedules are often irregular, with different bedtimes on weekdays and weekends, with travel across time zones, with shift work that disrupts natural rhythms. Establishing a regular sleep schedule, even on weekends, can help restore this natural pattern. Another lesson is the importance of community. Our ancestors slept surrounded by others, in physical contact, in shared space. This closeness provided comfort, security, and warmth. It also reinforced social bonds, making the group stronger and more cohesive. Today, we often sleep alone or with one partner in separate rooms in separate beds. While privacy has its benefits, we may have lost something in the process. For those who struggle with sleep, the presence of another person can be calming, can provide security, can ease the transition into sleep. Another lesson is the importance of natural light. Our ancestors woke with the sun, exposed to bright light that signaled to their bodies that it was time to be awake. This light exposure helped set their circadian rhythms, making it easier to fall asleep at night. Today, we often wake in darkness, spend our days indoors under artificial light, and then expose ourselves to bright screens at night. This disrupts the natural light-dark cycle that our bodies evolved to expect. Getting outside during the day, especially in the morning, and dimming lights at night can help restore this natural pattern. Another lesson is the importance of physical activity. Our ancestors were active during the day, walking, hunting, gathering, working. This physical activity promoted deep restorative sleep at night. Today, we're often sedentary, and our sleep suffers as a result. Regular exercise, especially outdoors, can improve sleep quality. Another lesson is the importance of winding down. Our ancestors had a natural transition period between day and night, the time around the fire, the storytelling, the quiet conversation. This period allowed them to decompress, to process the day, to prepare for sleep. Today, we often go from stimulating activities directly to bed, with no transition period. Creating a bedtime routine, a period of quiet activity before sleep, can help signal to your body that it's time to rest. Now let's consider something more philosophical, the meaning of sleep in human life. Sleep is not just a biological necessity. It's a profound human experience, a time of vulnerability, of renewal, of connection to something beyond ourselves. For our ancestors, sleep was likely imbued with spiritual significance. Dreams were messages from the spirit world. Sleep was a kind of death. Awakening was a kind of rebirth. The night was a time when the boundaries between worlds grew thin, when ancestors could visit, when spirits could speak. This sense of the sacredness of sleep persists in many cultures today. In some traditions, sleep is seen as a gift from the gods, a time when the soul can travel, a time when healing can occur. In others, dreams are interpreted as guidance, as warnings, as messages from the divine. We may have lost some of this spiritual dimension in our modern, secular world. We treat sleep as a problem to be solved, as a commodity to be optimized, as an obstacle to productivity. But perhaps we've lost something important, a sense of the mystery of sleep, of its power, of its place in the human experience. Now let's explore in greater depth the archaeological evidence for prehistoric sleep. Each discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, another glimpse into the nighttime world of our ancestors. At the site of Jesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, dating to about 780,000 years ago, archaeologists found evidence of controlled fire use by Homo erectus, or a related species. The presence of burned seeds, wood, and flint in distinct concentrations suggests that these early humans were managing fire, creating hearths that would have provided warmth and light through the night. This is some of the earliest evidence for the transformation of night by fire. At the site of Kesem Cave in Israel, dating to about 400,000 years ago, archaeologists found a deep accumulation of ash and burned bone, suggesting that fire was used repeatedly in the same location over long periods. This cave also contains evidence of systematic butchering of game, of tool-making, and of social gathering. The hearth at Kesem would have been the center of nightly activity, a place where early humans gathered, ate, talked, and eventually slept. At the site of Kebara Cave in Israel, dating to about 60,000 years ago and associated with Neanderthals, archaeologists found a distinct sleeping area within the cave. This area was located away from the main activity zones, in a more protected part of the cave. It contained concentrations of organic material that would have served as bedding, including grasses and leaves. The bedding had been burned and replaced multiple times, suggesting regular maintenance to keep the sleeping area clean and pest-free. At the site of a brick Romani in Spain, dating to about 55,000 years ago and also associated with Neanderthals, archaeologists found evidence of multiple hearths arranged in a pattern that suggests organized use of space. Around these hearths, they found areas with fewer artifacts, interpreted as sleeping areas. The sleeping areas were located near the hearths, but away from the main activity zones, suggesting that Neanderthals were creating distinct spaces for different activities, including sleep. At the site of Sibudu Cave in South Africa, dating to about 77,000 years ago and associated with early Homo sapiens, archaeologists made a remarkable discovery. They found layers of bedding made from sedges and other plants, and in these layers, they found leaves of the Cryptocarya tree, a plant that is still used today as an insect repellent and insecticide. This suggests that early humans were not just creating comfortable beds, but were actively managing their sleeping environment, using plants to keep away mosquitoes and other pests. At the site of Border Cave in South Africa, dating to about 200,000 years ago, archaeologists found ash layers mixed with grass bedding, suggesting that bedding was burned periodically to clean it and to control pests. This is the same practice seen at much later sites, indicating a long tradition of bed maintenance stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. At the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, which we've already visited, archaeologists found not just sleeping areas, but also evidence of the social organization of sleep. The dwellings were large enough for multiple families, and the arrangement of artifacts suggests that each family had its own sleeping area within the larger structure. This is an early example of the privatization of sleep, of the creation of family sleeping spaces within a communal dwelling. At the site of Mezheric in Ukraine, dating to about 15,000 years ago, archaeologists found multiple dwellings made of mammoth bones, arranged in a small village. Each dwelling had its own hearth and its own sleeping area, suggesting that individual families or groups had their own homes, their own private sleeping spaces. This is a step toward the kind of domestic organization we see in later agricultural villages. At the site of Çatalhöyük in Turkey, dating to about 9,000 years ago and one of the world's first cities, archaeologists found houses built closely together, with no streets between them. Entry was through the roof, and inside, each house had a main room with a hearth and raised platforms along the walls. These platforms, covered with mats and hides, were the sleeping areas. They were also used for sitting during the day, and they sometimes contained burials beneath them, keeping the ancestors close even in sleep. At the site of Skara Brae in the Orkney Islands of Scotland, dating to about 5,000 years ago, archaeologists found a Neolithic village with stone-built houses, each containing stone furniture, including beds. The beds were box-like structures built into the walls, raised off the floor, and filled with soft material. They were arranged in pairs, with smaller beds for children nearby. This is the earliest clear evidence of beds as dedicated sleeping furniture, and they look remarkably like the beds we use today. Each of these discoveries shows the evolution of sleep over hundreds of thousands of years, from simple bedding on cave floors to dedicated sleeping platforms to built-in beds. They show that our ancestors cared about comfort, about cleanliness, about creating a space where they could rest safely and well. Now let's consider the role of clothing in prehistoric sleep. Clothing is not just for daytime, it also plays a crucial role in nighttime comfort and warmth. The earliest evidence for clothing comes from the appearance of hide scrapers and awls in the archaeological record, tools used to prepare animal skins for wearing. At sites dating to around 100,000 years ago, we see an increase in these tools, suggesting that clothing was becoming more sophisticated. In cold climates, clothing would have been essential for sleep. Without it, even with fire and shelters, people would have struggled to stay warm through the long winter nights. Four garments worn during the day would have been taken off or loosened for sleep, but still used as covering. In warmer climates, clothing might have been minimal or absent during sleep. But even there, some covering would have been useful for protection from insects, for comfort, for modesty. A light hide or woven mat might have been all that was needed. The invention of sewing, of needles made from bone or ivory, allowed for more fitted garments, for clothing that could trap body heat more effectively. This would have been a game changer for sleep in cold climates, allowing people to create sleeping bags of a sort, enclosures of fur that retained warmth throughout the night. Imagine a prehistoric person on a cold night, wrapped in a fur sleeping bag, curled up by the fire. The fur traps their body heat, creating a warm microclimate even as the temperature outside drops below freezing. They can sleep deeply, undisturbed by the cold, waking only occasionally to add wood to the fire. Now let's consider the role of the group in maintaining warmth. In cold climates, people would have slept close together, sharing body heat. This is still practiced by people in extreme environments today, by mountaineers, by polar explorers, by traditional peoples of the Arctic. The arrangement of sleepers would have been carefully considered. The youngest and most vulnerable in the center, where it's warmest. The adults on the outside, providing a barrier against the cold. The elderly near the fire, where they can benefit from its warmth without being too exposed. This physical closeness would have reinforced social bonds, creating a sense of intimacy and trust. To sleep with someone, to share their warmth, to trust them with your vulnerability is a powerful bonding experience. It's no coincidence that we use the same word, intimacy, for both physical closeness and emotional connection. Now let's consider the sounds of the prehistoric night. What did our ancestors hear as they lay in the darkness, waiting for sleep? They would have heard the wind in the trees, the rustle of leaves, the distant howl of a predator, the cry of a night bird. They would have heard the crackle of the fire, the soft breathing of those around them, the occasional murmur of a sleeper dreaming. These sounds would have been both comforting and alarming. The familiar sounds, the breathing of loved ones, the crackle of the fire would have signaled safety, normalcy, the presence of the group. The unfamiliar sounds, the unexplained rustle, the distant howl would have signaled danger, would have put them on alert, would have made them reach for a weapon or call out to the watch. The soundscape of the prehistoric night was rich and varied, full of information about the world around them. Our ancestors would have been expert listeners, able to distinguish between the sounds of different animals, to judge distance and direction, to know which sounds meant danger and which meant safety. Today, our nights are often silent, sealed off from the outside world by walls and windows and insulation. But our ears still strain for sound, still listen for the cues that our ancestors relied on. This may be why some people find white noise or nature sounds helpful for sleep. They provide a comforting backdrop, a reminder of the world outside, a connection to our deep past. Now let's consider the smells of the prehistoric night. Our ancestors would have been surrounded by a rich tapestry of smells, the smoke of the fire, the scent of the furs they slept on, the smell of their companions, the odors of the landscape outside. Smoke would have been a constant presence, clinging to their clothes, their hair, their bedding. It would have been the smell of home, of safety, of community. Even today, the smell of wood smoke evokes something primal in many of us, a connection to our ancestors and their fires. The furs they slept on would have had their own smell, the scent of the animals they came from, mixed with the smoke and the smell of their own bodies. This would have been a familiar, comforting smell, the smell of rest, of sleep, of home. The smell of their companions would also have been present, the unique scent of each person, familiar and reassuring. We know today that the smell of a loved one can reduce stress, can promote relaxation, can help us sleep. Our ancestors would have experienced this every night, surrounded by the smells of those they trusted most. And outside, the smells of the landscape, of damp earth, of vegetation, of distant animals would have drifted in on the night breeze, carrying information about the world beyond the firelight. Today, we've largely eliminated smells from our sleeping environment. We sleep in sealed rooms, with filtered air, with scents carefully controlled or eliminated. But our noses still work, still send signals to our brains about the world around us. Perhaps we've lost something by sanitizing our sleeping environment, by removing the smells that would have been so familiar to our ancestors. Now let's consider the stars. For our ancestors, the night sky was a constant presence, a vast canopy of light that wheeled overhead as they slept. They would have known the stars intimately, would have watched them change with the seasons, would have told stories about them, would have used them to navigate, to predict the weather, to mark the passage of time. The stars would have been visible from their sleeping places, through the smoke hole of a dwelling, through the entrance of a cave, through the branches of a tree. As they drifted towards sleep, they might have gazed up at the stars, letting their minds wander among them. Imagine lying on your back, looking up at the Milky Way, a river of light stretching across the sky. You know the patterns, the constellations that your people have named and told stories about for generations. You see the hunter, the lion, the great bear. You see the stars that mark the seasons, that tell you when to move, when to hunt, when to gather. This connection to the stars would have been profound, a daily reminder of the vastness of the universe and of your place within it. It would have inspired wonder, curiosity, and perhaps a sense of peace, of being part of something larger than yourself. Today, most of us rarely see the stars. Light pollution has erased them from our night skies, replaced by the orange glow of streetlights. We've lost that connection, that nightly reminder of the cosmos. But on clear nights, away from the city, when we look up and see the Milky Way, we feel something primal, something that connects us to our ancestors and their wonder. Now let's consider the dreams of prehistoric people. We can never know what they dreamed, but we can make some educated guesses based on what we know of dreams and of their lives. Their dreams would have been filled with the stuff of their daily lives, with hunts and gatherings, with the people they knew, with the places they frequented. They would have dreamed of animals, of the beasts they hunted and the beasts that hunted them. They would have dreamed of their children, their parents, their mates. They would also have dreamed of things beyond their daily experience, of spirits and ancestors, of places they'd never been, of events that never happened. Dreams would have been a source of mystery, of inspiration, of fear. They would have been discussed in the morning, interpreted, acted upon. In many traditional cultures, dreams are seen as real as waking experience, as visits from the spirit world, as messages from ancestors. A powerful dream might send someone on a quest, might change their name, might alter their place in the community. Dreams matter in ways that are hard for us to understand in our rational, scientific world. For prehistoric people, the boundary between dreaming and waking may have been more fluid than it is for us. In the darkness, half awake, half asleep, they might have seen visions, might have heard voices, might have felt the presence of spirits. The night was a time when the ordinary rules were suspended, when the supernatural could break through. This is reflected in the art of prehistoric people, in the cave paintings of Europe, in the carvings of animals and human figures, in the burial practices that suggest beliefs about an afterlife. These are the visible remnants of a world where dreams were real, where the spirit world was as present as the physical world, where sleep was a journey as important as any waking journey. Now let's consider the role of sleep in the development of human culture. Sleep is not just a biological necessity, it's also a cultural phenomenon shaped by and shaping the way we live. Around the fire at night, our ancestors told stories. These stories were not just entertainment, they were education, religion, history, philosophy. They passed on knowledge about where to find food, how to avoid danger, what the spirits expected. They created a shared worldview, a common understanding of the world and humanity's place in it. These nightly storytelling sessions would have been the foundation of human culture, the way that knowledge was preserved and transmitted across generations. Without them, without the time and space that night provided, human culture might never have developed as it did. The night also provided time for other activities, for tool making, for planning, for socializing. The fire extended the day, allowed humans to be productive after dark. This would have been a huge advantage, allowing more time for the activities that promoted survival and success. But the night also imposed limits. In the darkness, certain activities were impossible. You couldn't hunt, you couldn't travel far, you couldn't gather food. This forced a rhythm on human life, a pattern of activity and rest that shaped our biology and our psychology. This rhythm of day active and night restful is built into our bodies, into our circadian rhythms, into our hormones, into our very cells. It's a legacy of our deep past, of millions of years of sleeping through the night and being active during the day. Now let's consider how sleep differs between the sexes and between different ages. In traditional societies, as in our own, sleep patterns vary by age and by gender. Infants and young children sleep more than adults, and they wake more frequently, especially to nurse. This would have been accommodated by the group, with mothers sleeping near their infants, able to respond quickly to their needs. Children, as they grow, would have slept with siblings or with other children, forming their own sleeping clusters within the larger group. They would have learned from adults how to prepare their sleeping areas, how to tend the fire, how to be safe at night. Adults, especially those in their prime, would have had the most varied sleep patterns. Hunters might have slept deeply after a successful hunt, exhausted by the day's exertion. Gatherers might have slept more lightly, aware of the need to rise early. Mothers of young children would have had their sleep interrupted frequently, would have learned to function on less sleep, would have developed the ability to fall back asleep quickly. Elders might have slept less, might have woken earlier, might have taken on the role of night watch, using their experience and wisdom to protect the group while others slept. In many traditional societies, it's the elders who sit by the fire at night, who keep watch, who tell stories to the young. Their sleep patterns change with age, but their value to the group remains. This diversity of sleep patterns, adapted to different roles and different ages, would have made the group stronger, more resilient. The night was not a time of uniform inactivity, but a time of varied states, of deep sleep and light sleep, of wakefulness and dreaming, all contributing to the life of the community. Now let's consider the role of sleep in human evolution more broadly. Sleep is not unique to humans. All mammals sleep, all birds sleep, even some reptiles and fish show sleep-like states. But human sleep has some unique features that may have played a role in our evolution. One unique feature is the length of human sleep. Compared to other primates, humans sleep relatively little, about 7 to 8 hours per night, compared to 10 to 15 hours for many monkeys and apes. This may be because our sleep is deeper, more efficient, allowing us to get the same restorative benefit in less time. Another unique feature is the pattern of human sleep. Humans tend to sleep in one long block at night, while many other mammals sleep in multiple short bouts throughout the day and night. This consolidated sleep pattern may have evolved because of the dangers of the night, because sleeping in one long block was safer than waking frequently, because fire and shelter allowed us to sleep deeply and continuously. Another unique feature is the amount of REM sleep, the stage of sleep associated with dreaming. Human infants spend about 50% of their sleep time in REM, while adults spend about 20 to 25%. This is similar to other mammals, but the content of human dreams, shaped by language and culture, may be unique. Some researchers have suggested that REM sleep and the dreams that accompany it played a crucial role in human evolution. Dreams may have helped us process emotions, consolidate memories, solve problems, imagine possibilities. The creative insights that sometimes come in dreams may have given our ancestors an edge, may have helped them adapt to new challenges, may have fueled the cultural innovations that made us human. Now let's consider the dangers of the prehistoric night in more detail. We've touched on predators, but there were other dangers as well. One danger was the cold. Without adequate shelter and warmth, a person could freeze to death on a cold night. This was especially true in Ice Age Europe, where temperatures could drop far below freezing. But even in milder climates, the night could be cold enough to be dangerous. especially for the young, the old, the sick. Another danger was injury. In the darkness, it was easy to stumble, to fall, to hurt yourself. A simple injury, a broken ankle, a deep cut, could be life-threatening in a world without medicine. The night demanded caution, demanded that you stay close to the fire, that you move carefully if you had to move at all. Another danger was fire itself. The fire that protected them could also harm them. A spark landing on dry bedding, a child rolling too close to the flames, a sudden wind blowing embers into flammable material, all could lead to disaster. Fire had to be managed carefully, watched constantly, respected. Another danger was illness. In the close quarters of a camp or cave, illness could spread quickly. The night was a time when fevers spiked, when coughs worsened, when the sick might die. The group had to care for its sick, to keep them warm, to comfort them, to mourn them when they didn't survive. Another danger was conflict. Within the group, disputes could arise, tensions could flare, violence could erupt. The night, when people were tired and vulnerable, could be a time when these tensions boiled over. Maintaining harmony, resolving conflicts, keeping the peace, these were essential for the safety of all. Despite all these dangers, our ancestors survived. They learned to manage the risks, to create safe sleeping environments, to care for each other through the night. Their success is our success. Their survival made our existence possible. Now let's consider the role of sleep in human sociality. Sleep is often seen as a solitary activity, but for most of human history, it was deeply social. Sleeping together created bonds, built trust, reinforced relationships. The physical closeness, the shared vulnerability, the intimacy of rest, all contributed to the cohesion of the group. People who slept together were people who cared for each other, who trusted each other, who would fight for each other. This social dimension of sleep may have been crucial for the evolution of human cooperation. In a world where survival depended on the group, where individuals could not survive alone, the bonds formed through shared sleep would have been essential. Sleep also provided opportunities for social learning. Around the fire at night, children learned from adults, the young learned from the old, everyone learned from the stories and songs and teachings that were shared. The night was a classroom, a church, a theater, all in one. Sleep also provided opportunities for romance, for pair bonding, for the intimate connections that lead to reproduction and to lasting relationships. The night, with its privacy and quiet, would have been a time for couples to be together, to strengthen their bonds, to conceive the next generation. In all these ways, sleep was not just a biological necessity, but a social one, a time when the group was renewed, when relationships were strengthened, when the fabric of society was woven. Now let's consider the transition from sleep to waking. For our ancestors, waking was not the abrupt, jarring experience it can be for us, with alarms and bright lights and immediate demands. It was a gradual process, tied to the natural light of dawn. As the sky began to lighten, as the birds began to sing, as the world slowly came to life, our ancestors would have stirred. They would have lain for a while, half awake, half asleep, in that pleasant state between dreaming and waking. They might have talked quietly, might have nursed a baby, might have simply enjoyed the warmth and comfort of their sleeping place. As full daylight arrived, they would have risen, would have stretched, would have begun the day's activities. The fire would be rekindled, food prepared, plans made. The night was over, the day had begun. This gradual transition, this gentle easing into wakefulness, is something we've largely lost. We're jerked awake by alarms, we're immediately confronted with demands, we're expected to be alert and productive from the moment we open our eyes. No wonder many of us struggle with mornings. Perhaps we can learn from our ancestors, can create our own gradual transition, can allow ourselves to wake slowly, to lie in bed for a while, to ease into the day. It might make our mornings more pleasant, our days more productive, our lives more human. Now let's consider the end of life and the connection between sleep and death. For many cultures throughout history, sleep has been seen as a kind of death, a temporary leaving of the body, a journey to another world. And death has been seen as a kind of sleep, a permanent rest, a final peace. This connection is reflected in our language, in phrases like put to sleep for euthanizing animals, in eternal rest for the dead, in sleeping with the ancestors for burial. It's reflected in our customs, in the way we prepare the dead for burial, laying them out as if for sleep, sometimes with pillows and blankets. For prehistoric people, this connection would have been powerful. When someone died, they would have been laid to rest in a sleeping position, curled up as if for sleep. They would have been given grave goods, tools, food, ornaments, things they might need on their journey. They would have been buried near the camp, near the sleeping places of the living, so that they could remain with the group even in death. At some sites, like Sattelherjuk, people were buried beneath the sleeping platforms so that the living slept directly above their ancestors. This must have created a profound sense of connection, of continuity, of the dead watching over the living as they slept. This connection between sleep and death is something we've largely lost, sanitized and separated in our modern world. But it's there, in the quiet of the night, in the peace of rest, in the mystery of what lies beyond. Perhaps it's something we should remember, something that can give sleep a deeper meaning, a connection to the great cycle of life and death that encompasses us all. Now let's consider the legacy of prehistoric sleep in our own lives. Every night, when we lie down to sleep, we're participating in a ritual as old as humanity. The positions we assume, the rhythms we follow, the dreams we dream, all have deep roots in our evolutionary past. Our need for darkness, for quiet, for comfort, for safety, all reflect the conditions our ancestors experienced. Our difficulty sleeping in new places, our preference for familiar beds, our tendency to wake at strange sounds, all are echoes of the vigilance that kept our ancestors alive. Our dreams, with their strange narratives, their emotional intensity, their occasional insights, are the same kind of dreams that our ancestors had. When we dream of being chased, of falling, of losing our teeth, we're experiencing the same kinds of dreams that prehistoric people experienced, dreams rooted in the same human brain. Our love of stories, of being told tales before bed, of having a bedtime routine, all reflect the nightly gatherings around prehistoric fires. When we read to our children at bedtime, we're continuing a tradition that goes back tens of thousands of years. Our comfort in physical closeness, our preference for sleeping with a partner, our children's need for us nearby at night, all reflect the communal sleeping of our ancestors. Even when we sleep alone, we often use body pillows, stuffed animals, other substitutes for the warmth we evolved to expect. In all these ways, the sleep of our ancestors lives on in us. It's encoded in our genes, in our brains, in our bodies. It's a legacy that connects us to every human who ever lived, to every night that ever fell, to every dream that ever was dreamed. Now let's consider how we can honor this legacy, how we can improve our own sleep by understanding and respecting our evolutionary heritage. We can create darkness by using blackout curtains, by turning off screens, by dimming lights in the evening. We can let our bodies know that night is coming, that it's time to prepare for sleep. We can create coolness by lowering the thermostat, by using light bedding, by allowing our body temperature to drop naturally. We can mimic the cooling of the night that our ancestors experienced. We can create routine by going to bed at the same time each night, by waking at the same time each morning, by having a consistent bedtime ritual. We can give our bodies the regularity they evolved to expect. We can create community by sleeping with a partner, by having our children nearby, by fostering the closeness that humans evolved to need. Even if we sleep alone, we can create a sense of connection, of being part of something larger. We can create quiet by reducing noise, by using white noise to mask disruptive sounds, by allowing our brains to settle into the peace of night. We can recreate the soundscape of the prehistoric night, the gentle crackle of the fire, the soft breathing of loved ones. We can create comfort by investing in a good bed, in soft bedding, in a sleeping environment that feels safe and pleasant. We can honor our ancestors' efforts to create comfortable sleeping places, their gathering of soft grasses, their arrangement of furs. We can honor our dreams by paying attention to them, by recording them, by reflecting on their meaning. We can reconnect with the ancient belief that dreams matter, that they have something to tell us. And we can honor the night itself by appreciating its beauty, by spending time under the stars, by recognizing the peace and rest that darkness brings. We can remember that night is not just an absence of light, but a presence of something else, of mystery, of possibility, of renewal. As you drift towards sleep tonight, think about all the humans who have done this before you. Think about the first hominins sleeping in trees millions of years ago. Think about the Neanderthals curled in their caves. Think about the early Homo sapiens gathered around their fires. Think about your own ancestors, your grandparents, your parents, all of whom lay down and slept, just as you're about to do. You're part of a chain that stretches back to the beginning of humanity, a chain of sleepers, each one trusting that they would wake, each one renewed by rest, each one contributing to the great story of human life. The fire of your ancestors has gone out, but the warmth remains. The caves they slept in have crumbled, but the shelter remains. The stories they told have faded, but the need for story remains. And the sleep they slept, the deep, restorative, necessary sleep, remains with us still. So close your eyes now. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles relax. Let your mind drift. You're safe, you're warm, you're loved. The night holds no terror for you, only rest, only renewal, only the gentle embrace of sleep. And as you sleep, perhaps you'll dream. Perhaps you'll dream of ancient landscapes, of fires and caves, of hunts and gatherings. Perhaps you'll dream of your ancestors, of the long line of humans who came before you. Perhaps you'll dream of something else entirely, something new, something that's yours alone. Whatever you dream, know that you're participating in the oldest human ritual, the nightly surrender to rest, the daily return to waking. It's a rhythm as old as humanity, as old as life itself. Sleep well, child of the ages. Sleep well, heir to millions of years of survival. Sleep well, and know that you are not alone, that you are connected to every human who ever slept, that the night holds you as it has held them all. The stars wheel overhead, the same stars that your ancestors gazed at. The earth turns beneath you, the same earth that held them. And you sleep as they slept, at peace, at rest, at one with the great cycle of day and night. Sleep now, and let the long story of humanity carry you gently into rest. In the quiet of the night, in the warmth of your bed, in the safety of your home, you are connected to everything and everyone who ever was. The past is not past. It lives in you, in your genes, in your brain, in your dreams. So rest, and let that connection be your comfort. Rest, and let the peace of ages settle over you. Rest, and know that you are home. Sleep well.